Hi, I'm Dan Courtney. I had a Christian and a creationist leave a series of so-called atheist creeds in the comments section of one of my YouTube videos. Now, this particular Christian I've had some email contact with over the last year or so, so I know a little bit about where he's coming from. But instead of trying to respond in the limited space in the comments section, I decided to make a video. Also, because these are very common misconceptions about atheists, I decided that it would be appropriate to respond in this manner. So I'm going to call this video Common Misconceptions About Atheists. Let's start with the idea of an atheist creed. The idea that atheists have some set of common beliefs, either to be considered an atheist or to gain membership in some type of atheist club, is nonsense. Atheists have many different beliefs, and the only requirement for someone to describe themselves as an atheist is for them to lack belief in a deity. No matter what a specific atheist believes, the only way he or she can have their atheist card revoked is to become a theist. There simply is no creed or dogma required. Now on to part one. There are actually 4 separate parts to this, so let's take them one at a time. Atheist Creed Part 1a. Quote, "Nothing created everything, and the laws of cosmology and contingency are false." While it's true that some prominent physicists, most of whom are atheists, find the concept that the universe came into existence from literally nothing compelling, this is by no means universally accepted. Stephen Hawking is one such prominent physicist, but he finds this idea probable not because he believes the known laws of physics to be false, but because they are true. Also, using the term created, as in nothing created everything, implies intent. Stephen Hawking or Lawrence Krauss or other prominent physicists don't use the word created because there is no indication of intent. We don't say that clouds create rain, but that rain comes from the clouds. The use of the term create is simply a stealthy attempt by the theist to inject intent into the conversation. Personally, I don't know enough about cosmology to determine whether Hawking's view is correct or not, but it is important to note how he came to his conclusion. Stephen Hawking has spent his life studying the deepest questions of physics and our universe in a rigorous scientific way. His conclusion about the origins of our universe did not arise because he wishes it to be true, and not because someone in a tall hat told him it was true, and not even because he read it in an ancient book. But Hawking's conclusion is the result of his understanding of science and the reality that has been revealed through its use. Atheist Creed Part 1b. Quote, "Life comes from non-life, and the laws of biogenesis, life can only come from life, can be violated." Unquote. The argument for a so-called law of biogenesis is an inductive argument. That is, we have only experienced that living organisms come from existing living organisms. This argument becomes fallacious and is known as a hasty generalization when attempting to extend the conclusion that life can only come from existing life into a universal deductive argument. Again, while many atheists find the conclusion that the first living organism originated from non-living organic compounds, no one is losing their standing as an atheist if they don't accept this idea. The Atheist Creed Part 1c. Quote, "Life has no ultimate purpose or meaning, and chaos, chance, and randomness provide the basis of denial of essential human significance." Unquote. No doubt some, including some atheists, may feel life has no purpose or meaning. I'm certainly not among them. Purpose and meaning imply a goal or intent. Interestingly, the theistic concept of an ultimate purpose is often thought of as serving a deity. The deity chooses the goal, and the theist's purpose is to play a specific role in moving the deity closer to that goal. The theist's, quote, "essential human significance," unquote, then is tied to a goal for which they had no say, and one in which their well-being is not the primary objective. Speaking for myself, as an atheist, being conscripted as a pawn in someone else's plan for someone or something else's benefit
is not the kind of purpose or meaning I would choose. In fact, the key here is having a choice. Atheists, in general, choose their meaning and pursue goals based on what they value. I value being a good husband and father, protecting the environment, and helping people think about religion more critically. The ability to choose the meaning in our lives seems to convey much more dignity to humanity than to be compelled to fulfill a plan of someone else's making. Atheist Creed Part 1D. Quote, absolute truth does not exist. Therefore, truth is merely subjective and situational in relation to accepted cultural mores. Unquote. This comment, of course, depends on what is meant by absolute truth. I've heard a particular Christian notion of truth as that which corresponds to the mind of God. Of course, this would be nonsensical to an atheist, since it presupposes God. Most atheists, and again, this is by no means universal, subscribe to some version of truth as that which corresponds with reality. The problem is that we can't escape our subjective experience of reality, and our ability to determine what corresponds with reality can never be determined with absolute certainty. But this doesn't mean that we can't use the tools of science and evidence and reason to maintain as much objectivity as possible. And in that sense, we can pursue with increasing certainty objective truth. There is an irony in a Christian attack on secular notions of truth. For if truth is in fact that which corresponds with the mind of God, then truth is at least 2 steps removed from reality itself. The first step is that God must conceptualize his understanding of reality, and the second is that man must then interpret God's mind. Assuming the Christian agrees that there is an objective reality in which we interact, then it only seems prudent to cut out the middleman. The second part of this supposed creed, the truth is situational in relation to accepted cultural mores, I find truly mystifying. This sounds more like a view of morality than truth, and so I'll defer comment until we get to morality further down the list. Okay, Atheist Creed Part 2 has 2 parts, so we'll tackle them separately. The Atheist Creed Part 2a. Quote, the design, order, and complexity observed throughout creation is merely accidental or illusionary, and man can be tricked into perceiving these things, but nature alone has done this by time and chance processes alone. Unquote. The first question that comes to mind is, what does it mean to be designed? Christians have variously pointed to things like watches or paintings or other items known to be man-made and attempted to draw a connection to naturally occurring structures such as the eye. But how is it that we know that watches and paintings are designed? One way is by direct observation, but we also infer intentional design precisely because these items do not occur naturally. However, if everything is designed, then how is it that we would distinguish between the watch and any other natural structure? Is every snowflake the result of intentional design? Is every rock the intricate combination of billions or trillions of atoms arranged with specific purpose? If so, then we would have no reason to pick out the watch from the rocks along the trail. Man's inherently evolved sense of agency seems to provide the psychological basis for the illusion of design referred to in this so-called creed. Also known as a type 1 error, or a false positive, there is a clear argument for why mankind should prefer to assume agency where none exists. Is the rustle in the grass a hungry predator or just the wind? Assuming that it is a predator intent on making you his lunch helps ensure that your genes are passed on. If you're right, you survive. If you're wrong and it's just the wind, then no harm is done. If you are loath to assume that there is intent behind the rustle of grass and you're wrong, you're immediately ejected from the gene pool. So yes, the intent required to conclude that something is designed is an evolved trait that gives rise to this common illusion. The Atheist Creed Part 2b. Quote, everything is the result of naturalism/materialism, and the universal human sense of a spiritual/physical dualism is merely the synthesis of superstition and ignorance. unquote. I find atheists vary in their opinion of dualism, specifically when it comes to mind/brain. On the idea of spiritual, however, most atheists, but certainly not all, tend to see the idea as a mere placeholder for the unknown. This can be seen simply by asking someone that professes a spiritual realm to describe such a thing. 1,000 years ago, lightning would have been relegated to the spiritual realm, as well as illness and earthquakes, or any other mysterious happening. Human sense of a spiritual physical dualism then is inferred from our overactive agency detection mentioned earlier. The Atheist Creed Part 3. This has 3 parts, so again, we'll tackle them one at a time. The Atheist Creed Part 3a. Quote, evil and non-evil are essentially the same, and ultimately there is no substantial difference morally between evil actions and good behavior, unquote. Evil is not defined here, but the standard definition is profoundly immoral. Atheists certainly do appreciate a difference between moral and immoral actions, but theists and atheists typically have a different professed definition of the term. I say professed because even theists of the divine command camp seem to conceive, at least in practical terms, of morality as having to do with the well-being of conscious creatures. In my view, well-being is the primary objective, and an action can be judged moral or immoral against this criteria. However, theists of the divine command theory view posit compliance to God's commands as the primary objective, and thus well-being is at best incidental to whether an action is immoral. The Atheist Creed Part 3b. Quote, information is not the result of intelligence, and thus it is a contrived misperception of man and can be explained by mere physicalism, unquote. This sentence contains the fallacy of a hasty generalization and an equivocation fallacy. The hasty generalization fallacy comes in the form of the implied meaning some information is the result of intelligence, therefore all information is the result of intelligence. This is an inductive argument that could be said to be known at some level of certainty. For example, if we were to say, some swans are white, therefore all swans are white, we would have virtually zero confidence in this statement since we have evidence of black swans. On the other hand, if we said some trees use photosynthesis, therefore all trees use photosynthesis, we could have greater confidence. In the case of information, we are better off examining the specific instances of claimed intelligence rather than positing a general rule with questionable application. The equivocation fallacy comes from the use of the word information. This term carries with it implications of intent common to many of the terms used by theists, such as create or design. But to be more precise, we should speak of information only in terms of the number of unique positions the elements in the system can assume while maintaining the essential nature of the system. For example, water molecules in a cloud can assume virtually any location within the cloud and in any orientation without changing the nature of the cloud. In this sense, the cloud is said to have low information. However, water molecules in a snowflake have specific orientations at specific positions within the snowflake, and changing even a few molecules would change the shape of the snowflake. In this sense, a snowflake is said to have greater information. For reasons of time, I won't go into why this is the case, but within a system, the Earth and the Sun, for example, we can have localized increases in information while having an overall decrease in information of the system, and no intelligence is required. The Atheist Creed Part 3c. Quote, man's logic and reasoning capacities are the result of the impersonal forces of nature. Therefore, the laws of logic and inference are subjective and accidental, unquote. While an atheist never need have even considered this proposition before, the first part of this statement is accurate. We are of and from the universe, and as biologist Julian Huxley once put it, quote, we are the universe becoming conscious of itself, unquote. However, the conclusion that is drawn in the second part of the sentence, therefore the laws of logic and inference are subjective and accidental, is mistaken. The mistake is confining the laws of logic to man's concept of these laws. The laws describe an aspect of reality, and while our perception of those laws is subjective, the reality to which they refer is not. Okay, Atheist Creed Part 4. Fortunately, only one part here. Quote, random mutations leading to transitional forms provide the mechanism for creatures to change into something totally new, even though mutations are in actuality a net loss or breakdown of genetic information. Unquote. There is an essential element missing here, as well as another hasty generalization. The missing element is selection pressure. Random mutations along with selection pressure, sexual and survival for example, concentrate those traits that result in greater reproduction of the gene. This selection is the key insight for which Charles Darwin is commonly credited. As slight changes accumulate from one generation to the next over long stretches of time, new species, a somewhat arbitrary distinction among living organisms, arise, rendering the previous species a transitional form. In this sense, all species that have ever lived, including ourselves, are potential transitional forms. The assertion that mutations only result in the loss of information is incorrect. A mutation is simply a change and may have no impact on the total information of the system, or may actually increase it. This error leads to the hasty generalization that takes the familiar form we saw previously. Specifically in this case, some mutations result in reduced information, therefore all mutations result in reduced information. The fallacy of this assertion can be seen in a mutation that has been studied in humans. Thousands of years ago, when humans first started domesticating animals, only a tiny fraction of humans had a mutation that produced digestive enzymes capable of breaking down lactose, the protein in animal milk. Prior to the domestication of animals, this was a benign mutation that was neither helpful nor harmful to the individual. However, those with this enzyme now had a source of nourishment not available to others and had a distinct survival advantage. Over many generations, the genetic variant that produced the enzyme became more common. Until today, a majority of humans have this gene. As we said, most mutations have virtually no effect on survival, but it only takes a very few beneficial mutations for them to be concentrated in succeeding generations and to alter the organism. Okay, we have a bonus. This is the Atheist Creed bonus proposition of skeptical delight. Quote, the precise fine-tuning laws of the universe, in conjunction with the multitude of specific anthropic principles which allow for the existence of life, are unexplainable and are simply to be accepted as what is. In other words, we are just the beneficiaries of luck and chance. Unquote. Well, this bonus creed could best be described as, if things were different, things would be different. This whole idea of fine-tuning not only tries to smuggle in the implied concept of a fine-tuner, but commits the fallacy of making a post-diction. That is, a prediction attempts to determine what will occur in the future, while a post-diction attempts to assign odds to what has already occurred. The probability, however, of what has already occurred is 100%. The fine-tuning argument is that the odds of the parameters of the universe being such that they would support life, even if it's only in the tiniest corner of the universe, are incalculably small. The simple retort, of course, is if it were different, there wouldn't be anyone here to complain about it. In other words, if things were different, things would be different. Lucky for us that they're not. Well, that's it. One theist proposed atheist creed that this atheist won't be having any part of. Thanks for watching, and if you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe. As always, your comments are welcome. Thank you.